The Time Cometh, to continue our journey through Virginia in the early 1850s. Now, in this commentary, Frederick Law Olmsted introduces a couple new characters to us as he attempts to glean as much information out of them about slavery. Now, some of them will be hesitant to provide it, and for various reasons, as we shall see. But from the information that he was able to gather, it provides some interesting insights into the minds of white Southern slave owners and the Southern society at large. So let's hear what Olmsted has to say by opening up the PDF version of the book titled A Journey in the Seaboard Slave States and turn to page 55, where he writes this.
There were, in the train, 2 first-class passenger cars and 2 freight cars. The latter were occupied by about 40 Negroes, most of them belonging to traders who were sending them to the cotton states to be sold. Such kind of evidence of activity in the slave trade of Virginia is to be seen every day, but particulars and statistics of it are not to be obtained by a stranger here.
So it was a normal occurrence in Virginia to see Negroes on trains riding off to be sold. But Olmsted noticed that he, being a stranger, found it nearly impossible to find any statistics on it, right? And he's going to explain why next.
Most gentlemen of character seem to have a special disinclination to converse on the subject, and it is denied with feeling that slaves are often reared, as is supposed by the abolitionists, with the intention of selling them to the traders.
Olmsted noticed that the gentlemen of character were reluctant to talk about slavery. And one likely reason for that is that Olmsted, being a Northerner, may have raised some suspicion, right? They may have suspected him of being an abolitionist seeking ammunition against them. So they remained guarded, quiet, and denied claims that slaves were being reared like animals to be sold to traders, right? And there was also a moral conviction to this as well. Many of them probably began to understand that it was distasteful to the broader society to be involved in that type of activity, right? So this is why they probably acted that way. But let's keep going.
It appears to me evident, however, from the manner in which I hear the traffic spoken of incidentally, that the cash value of a slave for sale, above the cost of raising it from infancy to the age at which it commands the highest price, is generally considered among the surest elements of a planter's wealth.
Meaning the cost of raising a baby to its peak selling price, which included providing food, water, shelter, and minimal care, was much less than what they were sold for, right? In other words, it was certainly profitable and one of the surest ways for owners to make money. So Olmsted wasn't really buying the denial from the gentleman of good character, right? And here's what else he said.
Such a nigger is worth such a price, and such another is too old to learn to pick cotton, and such another will bring so much when it has grown a little more. I have frequently heard people say in the street or the public houses that a slave woman is commonly esteemed least for her laboring qualities, most for those qualities which give value to a broodmare, is also constantly made apparent.
Which is to say she was valued by her breeding abilities, just like a female horse was.
A slaveholder writing to me with regard to my cautious statements on this subject made in the Daily Times says,
In the states of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri, as much attention is paid to the breeding and growth of Negroes as to that of horses and mules.
So this slave owner just came out directly with it and basically verified that Negroes are being bred like horses and mules are, right? Pay attention.
Further south, we raise them both for use and for market.
And he's letting it known that he participates in this too. That's why he wrote, further south, we use them for both use, meaning to get them outside to do the manual field labor, and for market, to be sold like cattle and chickens or other hot commodities, right? Here we go.
Planters command their girls and women, married or unmarried, to have children. And I have known a great many Negro girls to be sold off because they did not have children. A breeding woman is worth from 1/6 to 1/4 more than one that does not breed.
So they are more profitable, just as Olmsted had been hearing with his ears to the southern streets. Now let's continue.
By comparing the average decennial ratio of slave increase in all the states with the difference in the number of the actual slave population of the slave breeding states, as ascertained by the census, it is apparent that the number of slaves exported to the cotton states is considerably more than 20,000 a year. While calling on a gentleman occupying an honorable official position at Richmond, I noticed upon his table a copy of Professor Johnson's agricultural tour in the United States. Referring to a paragraph in it where some statistics of the value of the slaves raised and annually exported from Virginia were given, I asked if he knew how these had been obtained and whether they were reliable.
No,
He replied,
I don't know anything about it. But if they are anything unfavorable to the institution of slavery, you may be sure they are false.
This is but an illustration, in extreme, of the manner in which I find a desire to obtain more correct but definite information on the subject of slavery is usually met by gentlemen otherwise of enlarged mind and generous qualities.
That's part of the reluctancy we talked about earlier. And the gentleman getting defensive over him as a stranger asking about slavery, right? Olmsted suggests that on any other topic, they would have been wise and generous. But on the slave topic, they act in this type of manner, right? Now watch this.
A gentleman who was a member of the Union Safety Committee of New York during the excitement which attended the discussion of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 told me that, as he was passing through Virginia this winter, a man entered the car in which he was seated, leading in a Negro girl whose manner and expression of face indicated dread and grief. Thinking she was a criminal, he asked the man what she had done.
Done? Nothing.
What are you going to do with her?
I'm taking her down to Richmond to be sold.
Does she belong to you?
No, she belongs to. He raised her.
Why does he sell her? Has she done anything wrong?
Done anything? No. She's no fault, I reckon.
Then what does he want to sell for?
Sell her for? Why shouldn't he sell her? He sells one or two every year. Wants the money for 'em, I reckon.
The irritated tone and severe stare with which this was said, my friend took as a caution not to pursue his investigation. A gentleman with whom I was conversing on the subject of the cost of slave labor, in answer to an inquiry, what proportion of all the stock of slaves of an old plantation might be reckoned upon to do full work, answered that he owned 96 Negroes. Of these, only 35 were field hands, the rest being either too young or too old for hard work.
That's crazy how one man literally owned 96 people, right? This stuff is wild. Let's keep reading.
He reckoned his whole force as only equal to 21 strong men, or prime field hands. But this proportion was somewhat smaller than usual, he added, because his women were uncommonly good breeders. He did not suppose there was a lot of women to anywhere that bred faster than his. He never heard of babies coming so fast as they did on his plantation. It was perfectly surprising, and every one of them, in his estimation, was worth $200 as Negroes were selling now, the moment it drew breath.
You know how people make up stories about their dogs and how they had the strongest pit bull, or they had the dog with the rarest coat color, or the dog with the biggest head right within the breed? This is similar to what this is, right? The man swears up and down that he had the fastest breeding Negro women in town. Let's get some more.
I asked what he thought might be the usual proportion of workers to slaves, supported on plantations throughout the South. On the large cotton and sugar plantations of the more southern states, it was very high, he replied, because then hands were nearly all bought and picked for work. He supposed on these it would be about 1/2, but on any old plantation where the stock of slaves had been an inheritance, and none had been bought or sold, bethought the working force would rarely be more than 1/3 at most of the whole number.
And the rest of the slaves were either too old or too young to work in the field, like he mentioned regarding his plantation. And as the non-field hands, they were assigned other tasks to do while remaining dependent on their master to take care of their basic needs, right? Let's finish up.
This gentleman was out of health and told me with frankness that such was the trouble and annoyance his Negroes occasioned him, although he had an overseer, and so wearisome did he find the lonely life he led on his plantation that he could not remain upon it, and as he knew everything would go to the dogs if he did not, he was seriously contemplating to sell out, retaining only his foster mother and a body servant. He thought of taking them to Louisiana and Texas for sale, but, if he should learn that there was much probability that Lower California would be made a slave state, he supposed it would pay him to wait, as probably, if that should occur, he could take them there and sell them for twice as much as they would now bring in New Orleans. He knew very well, he said, that as they were raising corn and tobacco, they were paying nothing at all like a fair interest on their value. Some of his best hands he now rented out to work in a furnace, and for the best of these he had been offered, for next year, $200. He did not know whether he ought to let them go, though. They were worked hard and had too much liberty and were acquiring bad habits. They earned money by overwork and spent it for whiskey, and got a habit of roaming about and taking care of themselves, because when they were not at work in the furnace, nobody looked out for them. I begin to suspect that the great trouble and anxiety of Southern gentlemen is how, without quite destroying the capabilities of the Negro for any work at all, to prevent him from learning to take care of himself.
Uh-oh, look at what Olmsted discovered. That the Southern gentleman's great trouble was figuring out how to prevent the Negroes from taking care of themselves, or how to keep them dependent on the master, right? We're talking about the psychological aspect that the Southern whites mastered with their 9.0 version of slavery, right? This is what Olmsted is beginning to realize after talking to some of these gentlemen, because obviously the psychological dependency was of great concern to them, because according to this master, the slaves had too much liberty, and after earning a little bit of money from working overtime, they spent it on getting drunk, which was probably true. But on top of that, they also acquired bad habits, and I wonder what some of those bad habits were, and from whom they picked up some of those bad habits, right? We'll find out a clue to this in the next commentary, so you're going to definitely want to stay tuned. But right now, what I want to do is thank you for watching all the way until the end. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.